This is Agriculture Today. I'm Samantha Bennett with the K-State Radio Network. Ahead of us on this Friday's program, we start with K-State grain market economist Dan O'Brien. He provides this week's grain market update where he shares that the wheat export numbers continue to be strong and that the high demand for corn from feedlots continues, with bid prices showing exactly that. Also ahead, Jesse Sloan with the Kansas Forest Service. He serves as a district fire management officer. He joins us to talk about the importance of prescribed burning and previews the upcoming 26th annual Fall Forestry Field Day, occurring in Erie, Kansas. We end today's programming with K-State meteorologist Chip Redmond. He shares insight into the latest precipitation received in parts of western Kansas this week, the current cold front that we are experiencing, and what to expect in the week or so ahead. That and more is coming up ahead on Agriculture Today. Is Agriculture Today. We are back now with Jesse Sloan. He is the Southeast District Fire Management Officer for the Kansas Forest Service, and he is joining us today to talk about prescribed burns in Kansas. So, Jesse, thanks for joining us.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So, let's start off with just the basics of prescribed burns. What are their significance, really, in the state of Kansas?
I think the first item that we need to consider in Kansas is a fire-adapted ecosystem. Fire has shaped this ecosystem over the years. When a person looks at the historical fire interval across Kansas pre-settlement of European settlers, the fire return interval for most of the state was on average less than every 12 years. The highest return intervals was in the Flint Hills region when return intervals average in every 3 to 6 years. In eastern Kansas, the return interval on average was every 5 to 8 years. The lowest return interval was for most far western Kansas. After the European settlement, the presence of fire on the landscape significantly decreased. Much of the decrease is attributed to creation of farms, tilled fields, farming, ranching, practices that significant fire suppression by the settlers. When fire is restricted from the landscape over time, one will start to see a shift in vegetation cover. This transition is from grasslands to more shrubs and then trees. The Native Americans realized this along with observing how quickly the grasses burned. Landscape recovered and was more nutritious and plottable for bison and other wildlife species they hunted for food.
Excellent. So obviously the significance of burns goes way back in terms of the history of the state. Obviously even before Kansas was Kansas, burns go back that far and it's benefited our state greatly. But what really are some of these benefits of burns? Does it help revive, vegetation?
Yeah, as mentioned previously, prescribed burns remove the thatch layer and provide a disturbance on the land, allowing greater diversity of plants, which in turn helps create a better diversity of wildlife species. Prescribed burning also rejuvenates grasses to make them more plottable for grazers. An additional benefit of prescribed burning is reducing the fuel load, and a big benefit of reducing the fuel load is when wildfires do occur across the land, it has a lower intensity due to a lower fuel loading. The risk of not doing prescribed burning is a change in vegetation cover often gets greater amounts of shrub and tree species, especially the red cedar, which when a wildfire happens, the greater fuel loading and presence of red cedar significantly increases the intensity and complexity of that wildfire.
Absolutely. So I guess the major risk here is if we don't burn and wildfires naturally occur, then we're at even greater risk of those spreading in ways that we don't want them to spread. So it's better to do a controlled burn to start with than to have something that's uncontrollable in the end, really.
Absolutely. That is correct.
In terms of some of the best practices when it comes to prescribed burns and kind of how to plan, what can those tuning in really take away in terms of those kind of topics?
I think for individuals who are not familiar or comfortable with prescribed burning, this is where gathering as much information about, planning for that event or that burn and conducting a prescribed burn is essential. There is a wealth of information on the web. Folks can get notebooks about planning for prescribed fire. These notebooks can often also be picked up at the local KSU extension offices, and they can get a lot of information through those books. This is the beginning phase to get familiar with the process of prescribed burning. I think the next step is to determine what goals for the property that they're looking for. Is it for grazing, wildlife habitat? What are they looking for to get out of that burn, or for that burn, the benefits on their property? So fuels reduction, invasive species reduction, to reduce cedar or trees and shrubs and so on. The purpose of determining the property goals is to help set a timing for the burn. And I guess for an example, if a person is wanting to reduce the presence of shrubs and trees on the property, that person should consider a growing season burn. The burn timing for these is typically July through September. This also holds true for the burns. Burn those areas during the growing season, but before seed production when targeting trees. The reason growing season burns is more effective is trees put a lot of effort into the growing phase during late spring, early summer, and then start to switch to storage of carbohydrates in the root systems. If the area is burned, say the first week of August, this is when they are their weakest, and it will be better control on that burn for the species that they're trying to.
Absolutely. So it's very specific depending on the needs of each individual landowner, so that's something to keep in mind. But like you said, our extension offices located across the state, local extension offices, they have resources readily available for those that are looking to learn more about different types of burns and different planning when it comes to that. And this was a question I personally had. I know current conditions right now, obviously across the state, aren't really the best when it comes to anticipating wildfires. So we had lots of burns canceled in the spring, from what I understand. And then obviously this year the state was really plagued by drought. So does that change any of our planning that we do for this upcoming season?
It can, yes. Drought conditions can be tricky. When in a drought and the long-term climate forecast shows that we're going to have continued drought, I often tell people to hold off until the next year. And I guess the reasoning for this is burning does reduce the soil moisture a bit, but during drought, and if grazed, there's often not enough burnable grasses present to get a good burn. And this will show especially true if wanting to kill trees. If the fire does not have enough heat, it won't be as effective. Once the rain comes and recharges the soil, the planning/burn plan is already done, and they can have that ready to go, and then they can conduct that burn the following season.
Absolutely. That makes perfect sense. And then, Jesse, as we're thinking about all of these things that we've covered today, and if listeners are tuning in and they're like, well, I have additional questions, they can't exactly call in. So sometimes I like to have whoever I'm speaking with provide some additional resources. So when it comes to prescribed burns, what are some additional resources that you suggest?
To get a hold of Kansas Forest Service, definitely they could reach out to me for any questions that they have. In the Southeast, I'm out of Parsons. I can give you my email, phone number. They're more than welcome to reach out. If I don't have that immediate answer, we have folks and fuels and so forth that I can get those answers for them.
Absolutely. And we will have all of that information in the show notes of today's program, which can be found on agtoday.net. So if you're interested in reaching out to Jesse and looking for some more information, we'll have all of that there. But then, Jesse, I know you have also an upcoming 2022 Fall Forestry Field Day. We've previously discussed that on the show. We were lucky enough to have one of your colleagues come and speak about all the happenings of that event and what people can expect. But if people tuning in now weren't tuning in then, what should they know about this event?
So on October 26th, 8:30 a.m. to 3:30 p.m. We're going to be at River Farms in Erie, Kansas, which is going to be a great event for Southeast Kansas. It's going to be the 26th annual Fall Forestry Field Day. You can sign up through KFS. The registration fee is $15 for the day. The people that are interested will hear about prescribed fire, timber fire. They'll also hear about management options for invasive plants and pests. They'll be able to see a portable sawmill demonstration, tree planting, and improving wildlife habitat, including out there is a very historical barn that will be toured, which is very interesting, and it's got a lot of history to it, so it'll be a good day.
Absolutely. Yeah, I hear that barn is a bit iconic in Erie. I guess people driving through the town often see the barn, so it catches people's eye easily. So those that are curious about what maybe the barn looks like on the inside, this is a great opportunity for those interested to be able to tour that.
Absolutely. They would enjoy it.
Absolutely. Well, Jesse, we can't thank you enough for joining us today. And this is your first time on Ag Today, so hopefully it was a good experience. But thank you so much for joining us.
You're very welcome. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Once again, that was Jesse Sloan. He is the Southeast District Fire Management Officer for the Kansas Forest Service, joining us to talk about prescribed burns in the upcoming 26th Annual Fall Forestry Field Day with the Kansas Forest Service. Before we cut to a short break here momentarily, a reminder about another event that's actually occurring not too far from Erie, Kansas. It's the Southeast Region Town Hall for Kansas small meat processors. If you remember, a few weeks back, we were lucky enough to be joined by Jesse Vipum as well as Dustin Pendle, sharing information about the grant that they received to help support Kansas small meat processors. As a result, they've been putting on these town halls across the state of Kansas to learn more about our small meat processor industry across the state and to learn about the needs of those processors. So this event is going to be held Thursday, October 13th from 5:30 to 7:30 p.m. And like I mentioned, it's going to be held in Parsons, Kansas at the K-State Southeast Research and Extension Center. Food and beverages will be provided, but as a result, they're really going to need you to register ahead of time to make sure they get good numbers. And this town hall is really an opportunity for open discussion to help discuss opportunities, constraints, and the needs that you face as a small or very small meat processor in Kansas in regards to subjects like food safety, business expansion, and even workforce development. So don't miss out on this opportunity. If this is something that interests you and would meet the needs of your business, be sure to attend that event. Once again, it is Thursday, October 13th from 5:30 to 7:30 p.m. at the K-State Southeast Research Extension Center in Parsons, Kansas. Once again, there is a link to register that will be in the show notes of today's program, which can be found on agtoday.net. With all of that being said, there's still so much ahead of us, so stay tuned for that and more ahead on Agriculture Today. This is Agriculture Today. We are back now for our weekly grain market update with K-State grain market economist Dan O'Brien. So Dan, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Samantha.
Absolutely. So let's go ahead and start with cash and futures as we always do. Harvest is on. And from what you've said, 50% of corn has already been harvested?
Yes, according to the latest USDA NASS crop progress report, at the start of this past week, we had 50% of the Kansas corn crop harvested. And of course, that's a large majority of the non-irrigated land out in the west and other parts of the state. And now, we're also getting into the irrigated cropland. And of course, that'd be in most cases, there'll be a little higher moisture, a little slower to draw down. Also, just in driving around the state, we're harvesting grain sorghum in some places, a little bit slower probably than the dryland corn, sometimes a little slower maturing. But I guess there's hope for grain sorghum to come through where the corn may have been damaged all that much tougher. So we'll see how the statewide yields come about. And the bids, as we come into the harvest time period, normally when we have an abundant harvest, we see a real weakness in cash prices. And we've seen the corn futures continue to trade basically sideways. Closed yesterday on Thursday, the 6th of October at 675.5, and still trading in a range of about $6.60 to $7. 675.5, just right in the middle of that, just bouncing around some. And basis bids for corn across the state, Colby at $1 over, East corn at $7.75. The same for Salina. Hutchinson $1.05 over. Columbus, the best bid in that area, is also $1 over at $7.75. 55 over at Topeka, and in the Garden City area, top bid. In Garden City, in the last few days, there's been a real diversity of bids, but the top bid that's available is $8.21 that I could see publicly, went to verify it online off the same sources, $1.46 over. So again, you're seeing that demand center really come in strong for bids. I think you and I were talking also on air. There's a Kansas beef feedlot summary for the month of August, put out by Justin Wagner down in the Garden City office, showed a range of bids from at feedlots of what they paid for corn, $7.85 up to $10.05. Average price $8.69. As we were surmising coming into that $10.05 very well could be rail originated grain brought in quantity. I understand there have been some trains that have come into the region, and just wouldn't be surprised that that's on the top end like that. Could very likely rail influence. So I would say also grain sorghum bids, also strong, running every one of the positive. The strongest ones, again, down in the Garden City region, 61 over, Colby at 55 over, 730, 736. And really bids ranging from just under $7 to about $7.06 in other parts of the state. So strong bids. Wheat bids holding up pretty well. Hopefully we have time to talk about that in a little bit. We've seen pretty strong exports here in the U.S. for wheat. I think we're running 4 weeks in a row now of over 20 million bushels per week in actual shipments. And actually, it's more like 23 to 25 in that range. Wow. And we need about 16, 17 million bushels to actually meet the USDA's projections. So, there's a WASDE report coming out next Wednesday. Very likely, we could see an increase in the USDA's projection of wheat exports given this pace that we're seeing. So it's something to watch. I would also mention for soybeans, just a lot of variability and gyrations going on in that market. You do see the strongest bids in the Hutchinson at 1377, 19 over, 1369 in Columbus, 11 over. Other parts of the state, not bad, particularly Topeka, Salina, a little weaker out to the west. The weakest in Colby at 80 under, Garden City at 45 under. So I guess for a grain market economist like myself, when you see this diversity of bids around the state, you start to match that up with, well, are they an export region? Are they a cattle feeding region, or do we have ethanol plants that are influencing these? Kind of humbling to know that I'm looking mainly at the publicly available elevator bids and at some of the private bids at feedlots and elsewhere, and other processors may or may not be what at least my eyes can see by my sources. So all of these for feed grains in particular are showing a real worry about having adequate supplies of grain. And now with harvest coming on, there's a strong rush to get hold of, to secure supplies, to pay really prices that aren't $4 or $5 or $6. We're paying $7, $8, $9, and as we witnessed, 10 in some cases. So tough situation with this drought, and it's really affected us here in our part of the world in particular. One other thing to throw in on that for ethanol plant bids, we also track that, and the two states with the highest bids in the U.S. right now for ethanol plants, at least as they've been published, come out of Kansas. Average bid for the week, most recent set of bids, $7.75 in Kansas, $7.28, $7.29 in Nebraska, $7.06 in eastern Iowa, but everything else is below $7. So we're right in the heart of it in terms of where the hot markets are, and that's driven by just lack of supply and still strong demand.
Absolutely. Yes. Speaking of lack of supply, I understand we were talking about, on a global scale earlier, some of these estimates that we're expecting to see with the latest WASDE report coming out in just a week or so here. Brazil and Argentina, the conditions aren't looking so great.
You've seen expectation that the Argentine corn and soybean crops would be lower than the last estimate by the USDA came out in September. Still about sideways for Brazilian corn in terms of the expectation of what will be found Wednesday. Sideways just slightly higher for soybeans. There are some reports that have come out here recently that point towards the possibility of some really dry La Nina associated conditions that could come and impact Argentina in particular and parts of southern Brazil. So, we shouldn't be in the business with universities of trying to beat the drum with hyperbole. We don't want to affect the market in any way, but these reports need to be verified. And if we do get parching, dry conditions in that part of the world, that'd be a real issue of all of our commodity markets, and would come right during a time when, frankly, we're really cheerleading for good crops to come in.
And from what I understand, a lot of volatility, and we normally expect for bases to be leveling off, but we're really not seeing that, obviously, like you've said throughout this program.
Yeah, for corn basis in particular, we're looking at the corn basis in Salina and Hutchinson central part of the state that we've been following, continue to be pretty strong. Topeka moving a little bit higher in the last week at key locations, moving higher in Hugoton. Again, there's some diversity of bids that are happening right now in that southwest Kansas area among some pretty important locations. And but for Hugoton, you see the basis continuing to improve. Of course, Hugoton's down closer to Texas and Oklahoma, and it's just that whole region affected. Sideways in Colby at about $1 over, and pretty much sideways in Columbus as well. But all these basis bids now are are basically at least $1 over the highest they've been in the last 3 or 4 years. Just, again, more indication of the tightness of supplies. And one thing I would like to say, if we have time, is that, Wednesday, numbers we'll be watching for that we'll particularly be focusing in on will be what the USDA says out of NASS, the National Ag Statistics Service, on the size of these different crops. Corn in particular, the latest USDA report said about an estimated 172.5 bushels per acre as the U.S. average corn estimate. The trade estimate is ahead of that. This October report is about for 172.1 instead of 13.944 billion bushels, down to 13.9. As different reports have come out in the last week or so, some of them that started at different places, but almost every one of them has been decreasing as we've got more data in on harvest. So quite a situation. And soybean yields projected to be about equal to where they were last year. One thing that's just interesting is we generally, from where we're sitting at, we're being kind of, I wouldn't say envious, but incredulous as to the good conditions that we generally have seen in the central and eastern corn belt. But yet it's dry enough back there that the river systems aren't having enough river flow to be able to handle barge traffic. And I understand that the Illinois River in particular has been dry, feeding into the Missouri, Mississippi downstream. So what a situation. I guess with that much dryness in that part of the country, I wonder how these crop yields, particularly for soybeans, how that'll work out. That if we had luxurious growing conditions, we wouldn't be worried about these river flows, but we certainly are seeing them. So still a lot of uncertainty and, I guess, risk that these crop production amounts that we're looking at right now could go lower and tighten up stocks that much more and raise prices as a result.
Absolutely. Yeah, the drought having effects even further north potentially than we would have thought. Definitely not something that we were hoping to hear. But as you said, we'll see the results of that in the numbers released next Wednesday. But Dan, if listeners are tuning in and they're looking for your entire report that you put out every week, where can they find that at?
We put that out on the Ag Manager website. It's www.agmanager.info. It's out of the K-State Ag Economics Department. It's a data-intensive entry. A lot of info there, but it's our best effort to try to put information out on weather, on cash and futures markets.
An excellent resource that we have on agmanager.info, which will be linked in the show notes of today's program, which can be found on agtoday.net. But as always, Dan, thank you so much for your insight.
Thank you, Samantha. Take care.
Absolutely. You as well. Once again, that was Dan O'Brien. He is our grain economist here at K-State, joining us for this week's grain market update. We will be back with more ahead on Agriculture Today. This is Agriculture Today. We are back now for our weekly agricultural weather update. And as always, to cover that this week, we have with us Chip Redmond. He is our K-State meteorologist. So, Chip, thanks for joining us.
Yep, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So let's go ahead and start with, some of the good of this past week. The West got some rain.
Well, isolated areas in the West, the 2% part of the state.
Stealing my optimism here.
But there was rain in areas that need it greatly. We saw as much as 0.6 of an inch there in Wallace County, less as you get further north and east, but through Colby got about 0.4 of an inch too. So the Southwest, couple localized places along the Oklahoma border also saw rainfall. Other than that, it was really dry across the state, and we just keep adding to our deficits. On a weekly basis right now, we average around 0.3 of an inch in the West. So like areas like Wallace saw double the rainfall this week. But as we get further east, they average in the southeast still almost an inch, around 0.9 of an inch. And that's a big amount to add on to the deficit every week. And so we just keep slipping further and further into a bad place with precipitation-wise across the state.
So because of that, I understand that our soil moisture improvements that we did have from September, the end of September, probably gone by this point?
Yeah, with the warm, dry conditions we've seen over the last week and breezy conditions, we had some wind over last weekend and into early this week. That really helped diminish any topsoil moisture we had. There's still a little bit of subsurface soil moisture, but it declined really quick with the conditions. And then we also have, especially over grassy areas and whatnot, we still have growing vegetation. So it helps deplete the moisture if it's not bare soil.
Absolutely. And because of this, I'm anticipating some drought monitor updates as well.
Yeah, we saw expansion of D4 drought in the southeast, as well as introduction of D3 drought in the Kansas City area. So it continues to expand further east and north, and granted, our precipitation averages are falling this time of year, so we'll start to see those changes slow down. But we also kind of get to the point where we're still seeing water supply impacts just because we're no longer in a flash drought. Now we're in a prolonged drought for most of the state. We start to see some of those longer-term water impacts. That's going to go as far as people are making cattle decisions already, and if they don't have surface water, which a lot of places don't, or they have a lot less, then they're not going to be able to supply water for the cattle. And then there's obviously still that hay pasture component where we didn't see the active grass growth that we needed to sustain cattle over the winter. And so the supplemental feed is needed, and there's a lot of herd things still going on out there.
Absolutely. Yeah, AJ Tarpoff joined us earlier this week and was sharing that people that have never had to transport water probably in their careers are now having to learn what's necessary to transport that water.
Yeah, I'd say that there's a lot of water resources that are not there right now. And as you look upstream in a lot of places too, there's just no water flow either. We might have had ponds that might have relied on spring water and maybe the upstream aquifer. They're not getting supplied anymore.
Absolutely. Some hard conditions for sure. And then in terms of looking ahead, I know we have a strong cold front on the way.
Yeah, we had a cold front pass overnight, and that brought much cooler temperatures to the region. And that'll stick around for about 24, 48 hours, maybe a little taste of early winter. The coldest air we'll see is in the far northeast, where we may see a localized first freeze. A little bit bigger area, we'll see some chances of frost. But we're kind of, as we get further and further into fall, we see these odds increase of colder air masses coming into the region. Granted, we have still really dry conditions, and as a result, we can see those low temperatures get colder and a higher likelihood of a freeze frost. But we need more of this cold air. We need some moisture with it, too.
As we warm back up after this cold front that we've had come through, are there any slight chances of precipitation on the way?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question. So we have some small chances of moisture next week in the eastern part of the state. Low probability just because the forecast is really challenging over the next few weeks. We're in that transition period, and then we also have kind of a stagnant flow pattern, and whether it's going to break down and how long it's going to take to break. It's hard to predict. Beyond that, there's some hints of maybe some increased moisture, but like I said, the probability is really, really low. I saw the 8 to 14-day outlook had above normal precipitation chances. I really don't see that coming to fruition. Any moisture we get will likely be at or below our weekly normals.
Well, good to know for sure. But Chip, as always, thank you so much for this update.
Yep, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Once again, that was Chip Redmond, our K-State meteorologist, providing this week's agricultural weather update. That concludes today's programming and this week's programming. You'll hear from us again on Monday with more on Agriculture Today.